And on the front, let's review ways that, reasons that sides are congruent. Right now, we can only use these 3 reasons for sides to be congruent. And then for angles to be congruent, we have a few extras. The middle 3 are if we have parallel lines. We have to have parallel lines in order to use one of those 3, any of those 3. And then we have vertical, or it's given, or we have an angle bisector. Okay, so when you have a statement that talks about sides being congruent, the reason has to be one of these 3. Angles congruent, the reason has to be one of those 6. Okay, so let's take a look at this problem. So right away we know that AB is congruent to CB, and I think I told you to go ahead and mark your figure with that given information. So AB is congruent to CB. Okay, so how do we know, that's our first statement, how do we know that AB is congruent to CB? Okay, so a pair of sides, we only have 3 ways to justify it, 3 reasons. Either it's given, or it's a reflexive, or we have a midpoint. In this case, it's given, so we're going to put given as our reason. And then there's nothing else I could mark on this triangle, so I'm going to go to the next statement. Segment BD bisects angle ABC. How do we know that that is true? Again, that is given information. Okay, so our next statement comes from this given information. So what does bisect mean? Cuts it in half. So our angle ABC, there's our angle ABC. And it is we are given that BD bisects that angle. So it's gonna cut it in half. So this angle right here will equal that angle right there. And that's what we have here. We have that angle ABD is congruent to angle CBD. How did we get that? How did we find that out? Right. It's telling us in our given that angle ABC is being bisected by that segment. No, this part's given. Number 2 is given. But from number 2, we can conclude that on 3, those 2 angles are congruent. And that's by the definition of angle bisector. So it's derived from a piece of given information. So it's not specifically stated in the given, but it's derived from that piece of information in the given. Okay, so the next one is, next segment is that BD is congruent to BD. So that right there. BD is congruent to itself. So what tells us, how can we say that? Right, they share that side. So remember, when we are trying to show that 2 sides are congruent in a triangle, we only have 3 options. Either it's given to us, it's the definition of a midpoint, or it's reflexive property. And do we have any information about it being a midpoint? No, they share the same side, so that is reflexive. So that's what you're going to put here. Reflexive property. And then, so I'm going to put 2 marks there. So do we have enough information to say triangle ABD is congruent to triangle CBD? Well, we have 2 pairs of sides and the included angle. So yes, by side, angle, side, they are congruent. Hadley, you all right? Okay. Make sure you're writing this down. Any questions on this? All right, let's move to the next one. Okay, so there's our figure. Does it tell us in our given that such and such is congruent to such and such? No. No. So we can't mark our figure just yet. We're going to start with the given information. So V is the midpoint of two segments. It's the midpoint of WZ and XY. So how do we know that? It's given to us. Okay, so from the given information, we can draw a couple of conclusions. If V is the midpoint of WZ, V is the midpoint of it, can we say that WV is congruent to ZV? Can we say this is equal to that? How can we say that? Because V is the midpoint of that larger segment, right? So by definition of midpoint, we know that those two segments will be equal. So our reason here is definition of midpoint. And I'm going to skip to 4. 4 says XV is congruent to YV. So it's saying XV is congruent to YV. Yeah, because the V is the midpoint of two of those segments. So from the second segment, we can write two equal segments, or yeah, two congruent segments. So step 4, reason 4 is definition of midpoint. Okay, let's back up to where we have these angles. So it is saying angle WVX, that's this angle, is congruent to angle ZVY, which is that angle. Okay. Remember, when we're talking about reasons angles could be congruent, it's either because it's given. Is that given information? Do we get information in the given that says those two angles are congruent? No. Are they vertical angles? They are, aren't they? So our reason for being able to say that those two angles are congruent is vertical angles. Vertical angles are congruent, therefore we can say those two angles are congruent. So we have a pair of sides, and a pair of angles, and another pair of sides that are congruent on the two triangles. Do we have enough information to say that the two triangles are congruent? Yes. By what theorem or postulate? Side, angle, side. All right? Because we only have two sides and we have the included angle. So side, angle, side. All right, let's take a look at this next one. We have that HI is congruent to JG, so HI. Okay. And what does this symbol mean? Right here. They're parallel. So HI is parallel to GJ. All right. So our first statement says HI is congruent to JG. How do we know that? It's given. Second statement. HI is parallel to GJ. That's also part of the given information. Okay, so now we're going to look and say that GJH, I'm going to use a different color because that seems to, this angle is congruent to IHJ. How do we know that those two are congruent? Well, let's remember, if we want to show angles are congruent, it's either given. Was that given to us? Those angles are congruent? Nope. Are they vertical angles? Nope. Do we have parallel lines? So did this fit one of those? Everybody okay with that? Okay. How do we know alternate interior? So we have that line parallel to that line cut by that transversal. And see how those are alternate interior. So we also have HJ congruent to JH. That's a pair of sides. And remember, it's either given to us, reflexive, what's the third one? Or midpoint, right? So is this given to us that HJ is congruent to HJ? Nope. Do we have a midpoint happening? Nope. So it's reflexive. So we have two sides and an included angle. Therefore, by side, angle, side, those triangles are congruent. Elena, do you think those triangles are congruent? So it has to be, if we're going to say yes, you're either saying by side, 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 or side, angle, side. Which one? Side, angle, side. That is correct. And we could have a lot of different combinations of how to write the congruence statement. What you need to check is that T for your first triangle is in the same spot that P is on the second triangle. Y is at the same spot as K. Does that make sense to you? And then Q is in the same spot as C. Okay. Number 2, Cameron, did you say that those were congruent? And by which one? Side, angle, side? Yeah, side, 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 because it's reflexive. They share that side. And let's say, for example, the first triangle, you're going to call it DAC. It would be congruent to triangle BCA. So this triangle TQY would be congruent to triangle PCK. Okay, so you might have it in a different order here, which means your letters would be a different order there. Just make sure they're in the same spot on both of your triangles. Number 3, okay, we haven't seen one like this before, have we? Here we've got this triangle JKM, and then we have the triangle KLM. They share this side right there. That's reflexive. I should put 2 marks there. So we have a pair of sides, an angle, and another pair of sides, and that angle is in between those 2 sides. It's the included angle, so yes.
So put L and N?
We're not going to use N.
J.
Yeah, so first of all, let's say they're congruent by side, angle, side. So my first triangle, I'm going to call it JKM. And then the second triangle would be LMK. So your J matches up with your L, your K in your first with the M in the second, your M in the first with the K in the second. All right, number 4, not congruent because the angle is not the included angle. So no on 4. On 5, they share that side. So Hadley, what are we going to say on this one? Do we have, where's the angle? There we go, 3 sides. We don't have any information about angles, so side, side, side. Triangle FCE would be congruent to triangle FDE. Or you could have those arranged differently, but they have to match up spot-wise. Number 6, we have our vertical angles, right? We do have some other angles because of parallel lines, but remember the instructions say, are they congruent by side, 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 or side, angle, side? Oh, wait a minute. We do. I didn't see this one right here on the last class. So we do have, because we could say this angle, D, is congruent to this angle, E.
Yeah.
And that is the included angle between those 2 sides. So I need to correct that on my other class. So it is side, angle, side. And triangle JDA is congruent to triangle MEA. Last 2.